Today we're going to start building a profile page system, and this is a video that people have asked about for quite a long time. We did build a login system in the previous object-oriented PHP video, and I did say that we're going to do a profile page system. So here it is. We finally got around to do it. I mean, it's not like people have waited for a long time for this video to be done. Hopefully. To begin with, the first thing I want to do here is just to kind of demonstrate what exactly we're going to be building, because you might want to see exactly what you're getting into here, since this is going to be a slightly longer video. It's not short, but you know, when it comes to building these type of things, of course, it's not going to be short. And with that said, there's also going to be timestamps below. So if there are certain sections of this video you might want to skip, or maybe if you want to return to certain parts later on, then of course you can just fast forward using the timestamps below. So with that out of the way, the first thing I want to mention regarding this tutorial here is that you don't need to have my particular project in front of me. We did build a login system in the previous project that we did, and you don't need to have that particular project. If you have your own login system, this is going to work too. There's just a couple of like 1 or 2 adjustments you might want to make. But other than that, this is going to work for any kind of login system that you might have built in your own project. Of course, it's going to be slightly easier if you have my login system, but it's not required in order to actually do this project here. And the same thing goes for the HTML and CSS, because you can actually see I do already have some stuff. And this can intimidate some people who are completely new to PHP and might be joining in on this video here because they just kind of want to learn how to build something like, for example, a profile page system. It is a common misconception I've noticed in my comments that if you don't have this HTML and CSS, then you can't do the PHP for this video. And that's completely not true. HTML and CSS is a complete side thing to PHP, so you don't need my specific HTML and CSS in order for this to also work. You can create any kind of page that you want to create using HTML and CSS and take this profile page system or the previous login system and implement it into your own thing, just so you know that you don't need to have my particular project in order to actually follow along on this particular project here. With that said, I do also want to mention that, of course, my personal files are available for download for all the members on the channel. So if you want to get these files and work from the same project that I have in front of me here, then of course you can download that at the bottom of my description. There will both be a completely fresh version, like the one that I have to begin with here, that only has a login system. And there will also be a version where we only did the HTML and CSS before we get into the PHP stuff. So with that said, let's actually go ahead and talk a bit about what exactly we're going to be building this video here. So as you can see, I have the completely fresh version in front of me. This is the one that we ended off with in the last video where we talked about how to create a basic login system. If I were to actually go down, because I did already create a user and actually log in using my account, so crossing 1, 2, 3, log in, you can now see that I actually get logged in here in the top right corner using my username. So I can actually click it here, but it doesn't actually do anything. Like I don't go to any fresh pages, you know, like a profile page or anything. It's just basically a login system that when I log in, that's basically it. I'm logged in, but nothing has changed inside the website. So what we want to do in this video here is, of course, when we log in, actually be able to click on our account and go to our profile page. And then depending on who's logged into the website, we want to change the content to actually fit whoever's logged in. But now we can't really see that in this version here because this is the fresh version. So let's actually go ahead and log out, and I'll actually open up the finished version that we're going to build together. As you can see, it looks the exact same way. But if I were to go down here and actually log in, 1, 2, 3, log in, you can now see that when I click the crossing, or the username link as you could call it, I would actually go into my profile page. And in here, I do have many different things. And I just want to go over exactly what I have in here, because we're not going to build everything when it comes to a profile page system, because a lot of these are separate systems that require a separate tutorial. But I do want to talk about what we're going to change in this video here. As you can see, we have a couple of different sections inside the profile page. And just to begin with here, let's talk about the left side. As you can see, we do have a small About Us section that has our profile image. We have our profile name. We do also have some profile settings in case we want to change something inside this page here. We do also have a About section below, which talks a bit about me if I want to tell people about who I am as a person. We have a Follow Us and Following section. So at some point, we're also going to build a following system. At the top, we do also have a introduction for any person coming in here, in case we want to tell them something about our profile page. If there's something specific, they can come in here to see. We do also have a posting section at the bottom here. Now, what we're going to build in this episode is going to be all the stuff in here that is related to the actual profile page and not separate systems, like I said, which means that the posting system is not going to be something we build in this video here. That is going to be a completely separate video. It would also make this video very long if we had to make that as well. So we're just going to focus on building the profile specific things, which does include having this intro section where we can actually tell people about our profile page. We will also have this left section over here where we have our username. We're not going to have a profile image system in this video here because, well, that is also going to be a separate system entirely. And I think I do already have a tutorial on my channel that talks about how to do this type of thing. But we will do a fresh one at some point. We will take this profile page system and just do a fresh one for swapping out profile images at some point. We will also create a about section down here that we can swap out, so we can actually change the text in here. And we will also create the profile settings page. So if I were to click this link here, you can see we get taken inside this very basic, little segment here where we can actually change the content inside our page. So if I were to actually type something here inside my about section, I can say blah, 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 just to have some text. I can change my title here. So I can say this is a title. And we can also go ahead and just, create some random text inside the introduction section inside my page. So if we were to save this, you can now see that I changed everything inside my introduction here. And I also changed everything inside my about section. So this is what we're going to be building in this video here. So the posting system is a separate video, and the profile image is a separate video. And of course, also the follower section down here is also going to be a separate video because, like I said, it's going to get very long if we build all this stuff in this video here. You're going to be sitting here for about 5 hours. I don't think a 5-hour video is going to be that popular for people to watch. So we're just going to focus on the profile page system to actually allow people to log into the website and go to a personal page where content changes depending on who's logged into the website. So of course, watching this video, this is going to give you a very good foundation for building a profile page system. It's going to give you an idea about how you can set up a profile page system essentially, and you're going to have something that you can actually build upon later on if you want to make changes to this or improvements or anything. But it's just to kind of give you an idea about how a profile page in a very simple way can be set up inside a website. So with that said, let's actually go ahead and get started on the actual project. So as you can see, I do have my project open here over on the left side. If you don't know, inside Visual Studio Code, you can go into File and you can say Open Folder. And that is going to allow for you to find your folder with your project in it and open it up so you can actually see it on the left side over here. So what I basically have so far from the previous video where we talked about how to create a login system is a index page. I have a style sheet. I do also have a folder for all my includes files. This is basically just the pages that we navigate to once we do actually submit a form. So if I were to submit the form for my login, then it's going to send me to a page called login.inc.php. And inside this file, we're going to link to all the PHP code inside our classes that are going to handle all the login stuff. The same thing goes for the logout and for the sign up. So as you can see, we do actually have them here. Basically, we're just linking to different classes that we have that actually has our sign up and login and all those things in order for us to actually do things inside our website. So again, these are part of the last tutorial. You don't need to have these. If you have your own login system, that is going to work perfectly fine. Just know that this is what I have for this video here in case you followed the last tutorial that I did on how to create a login system. I do also have a image folder. And again, this is not something that you need to have. This is just for basic images for my design inside my website. So this is not something you need to have in order for this to actually work. This is just to make the website look a little bit prettier when I had to create a tutorial for it, so you could see something that looked a little bit pretty inside the browser. I do also have a classes folder, which has all the different classes for this project here when we created the login system. So we have a database class, which basically just handles actually connecting to the database. I do also have a login controller class, which is the class that handles all the user input when we do actually log into the website. Then I do also have the basic login class, which handles all the different database changes. So once we do actually do something inside the login controller class and actually do the database changes, then we communicate with this class here to actually do the database things. And the same thing goes for the signup form. We have a signup controller class, which does all the user inputs. And when we do actually go into the website and we sign up the user, then this one is going to handle all that. But once we do actually do any database changes, we do that using our signup class. And that's basically it for when we did the last episode. So what we're going to do in this video here is we're just going to go ahead and build upon what we have here. Now, the first thing I want to do here is something that we should have done in the previous video, but it was kind of like, we only needed to have an index page, so there was not really a reason to do so. But because we do want to have separate pages in this tutorial here, I want to separate my index file into two different files. So basically right now you can see that we have our entire header for the website. So all this stuff here with the header tag is all the stuff that we see on top of the website. So all the stuff that you see right here with the actual menu, with the logo, with the sign up button, like this is stuff that you see on all the pages inside the website. And because of that, I want to take this, rip it out of my index page and put it inside a header.php file. And then basically from all the pages inside the website, we're going to link to the header file and just kind of like connect them again. And this is something that makes it easier for us to, whenever we want to make any changes to the header, to make sure that it happens inside all the pages inside the website by just changing one file inside our website. And this is something that is pretty basic. This is something that, PHP users usually like to do when it comes to websites, split up the pages in different sections inside different files. So we're going to do that to start with here. So basically, we're going to go ahead and create a new file. And I'm going to go ahead and create it inside just my main folder here inside the root folder. So create new file. I'm going to call this one header.php. Then I'm going to go back inside my index file and I'm going to take my headers section and just copy all the way to the top here. I'm going to delete it, save it, go inside my header.php and paste it in. And this is basically all we need to do with the header file. Going back inside the index file, I'm going to go ahead and open up my PHP tags at the very top here, just to make sure that we can write PHP. And then I just want to go ahead and link to this particular header file that we just created. So I can say include _once, and then we just go ahead and create a link to that particular page. So we can say header.php. If I were to do this, go back inside my website and refresh it, you can now see that it looks the exact same way. There's absolutely no changes to the website, and that's because even though we separated the header from the rest of the page, it is still going to be put together by us linking to it at the top of my index page. So again, this is linking to the header, so we can change it inside one file and then change the header in all the pages inside the website. So again, we got a little bit sidetracked here, but I do think it's important that we split up the pages just to make life a little bit easier for us when it comes to making a website. So the next thing I want to do is inside my header file, I want to go down to where we actually have the link that takes us to our profile page. Because as you can see, when I do actually log into my website, I have a small PHP section here that actually checks if I'm logged in using my session ID. And what I can do here is I can actually swap out my menu items based on if I'm logged in or not. And I do that here where I do actually link to my particular username. So I do actually paste in my username here. And then I also create a link around it. And what I want to do is I actually want to create a link to my profile page, because right now, as you can see, I just created a hashtag, which if I were to go back inside my website and refresh it, you can see that we do have the username up here, but when I click it, it's just going to create a hashtag inside my URL because it's not actually linking to anywhere. So what I want to do is I want to go back in here and I want to link to a profile.php. And with that, we can actually go back inside our website, refresh, and when I do actually click it, it's going to take us to a URL that says page not found, because we haven't actually created our profile page yet. So let's go ahead and do that. Going back inside our editor, we can go ahead and create a new file inside the root folder. So I'm going to go ahead and call this one profile.php. And I'm just going to go ahead and copy everything from within my index page and paste it inside my profile page, so they're going to be completely the same. After pasting it in, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start changing the HTML so it actually looks like my profile page from within my example. So if I were to go back inside my page here, this is the finished version of the website, of course. then you can see that I have some basic layouts in here. And this is what I'm going to start creating using HTML and CSS. Again, it's not an HTML and CSS tutorial we're doing right now, because this would be a very long tutorial if we had to sit here and do HTML and CSS together. So you can just go and create any kind of thing that looks similar to this using HTML and CSS if you want to. Again, this is not me being lazy, because I did ask all my subscribers at one point if they wanted me to include HTML and CSS in these tutorials here, and they said no. People would rather have a much shorter tutorial and not have HTML and CSS take up space, because it's something you should know already beforehand. So with that said, just go ahead and build something that looks similar to mine, or just build something completely different if you want to do that. It doesn't have to look like this. It's not going to make any difference in the PHP that we're actually going to build together. Just make sure you have a section where you have a title, a small description of your actual profile page, and a about section. If you're sitting there right now being a little bit overwhelmed because you now have to create all this HTML and CSS yourself, you don't need to. The only thing you need to have inside this page for this tutorial to work is a basic paragraph that talks a bit about who you are. So basically a about title and a small paragraph underneath it. And then you also need to have a small title down here that talks a bit about the introduction to your profile page, as well as a small paragraph. So essentially, if you don't want to create HTML and CSS for this video, you could also just go ahead and do this, delete all of this right here, and all of this down here, and delete all this down here. So basically this right here, just a basic title, a paragraph for the about section, a basic title for the intro section, and a paragraph for the intro section. This is all you need to have for this tutorial to work here. So don't get overwhelmed if you're thinking that, oh, now I need to create a lot of HTML and CSS to be able to do this tutorial. You don't need to. All this other stuff here is just because I want my particular page in here to look pretty. Okay, you don't need all that other stuff. So with all the HTML out of the way, let's actually go and start talking about the actual PHP stuff that we're going to build for this video here. So when we get started on building this profile page system, we will of course need to have a couple of pages or a couple of documents that are going to have some classes inside of them. Inside my classes folder, I'm going to go ahead and right click it and say I want to create a new file. And I'm going to go ahead and create one called profileinfo-controller.classes.php. Now, just like in the last video with the login system tutorial, let me just mention here that the .classes.php is basically just a naming convention that I like to use in these tutorials here. It's just a simple way to name the document, so we know that this is a document that has a class inside of it, instead of just being, one of the pages that we actually send a user to in order for us to actually get logged in or something. Again, just an example here, if I were to go down to my include pages, which is also PHP pages, then these actually look completely different from a class page, because this one doesn't have classes inside of it. It just had basic procedural PHP, where we reference to some of the class methods. So with our basic profileinfo.classes.php file, let's actually go and create another file. This one is going to be our controller class. So we're going to say profile info -control or CONTR .classes.php. And then the last one we need to create, which we didn't actually create in our login system episode, because we didn't actually need to show anything visually inside our website. But we do need to have a third class document, which is going to be the view class. If you know a little bit about the MVC model when it comes to creating classes inside PHP, essentially we have three different classes. We have a model class, we have a controller class, and a view class, and they all have different tasks they do. So the model class handles all the database connections, which is the ones that has nothing after it. So just basically the profileinfo.classes, for example. Then we do also have a controller class, which is the profileinfo-controller class, and that handles all the different inputs from the user. So whenever the user goes in and types something and needs to submit it to make changes to the website, that class handles all that stuff. And then when we have to show something inside the website that the user can actually see inside the page, then we use a view class. So we're going to go ahead and right click on our classes folder again, create a new file. I'm going to call this one profile-info-classes.php. So now we have a controller, we have a view, and we also have a model class. So with these three classes created, the next thing I want to do is I actually want to create our actual database table inside our database, because once we do actually set up our profile info page, we do need to be able to save information about this user here. For example, the about section and the intro title and the intro text, that has to be stored somewhere for the user to actually be able to change it themselves. So going inside our database, inside phpMyAdmin, and just in case you're completely new to phpMyAdmin, which you shouldn't be by now, by the way, then you can go in here by, of course, first starting your servers. So the Apache and MySQL server has to be started. And then you can go inside your browser and just type localhost/phpMyAdmin. And then you'll get to your databases page. But like I said, you should already have a login system ready. So going inside this particular page, right now I do already have a database that has my login system. So as you can see, I have a users table in here. I can actually zoom in so you can actually see something. Right now, if I were to click it, just to show you, I only have one user inside my website. So I have a couple of different information here. And what I want to do is I want to actually create a profile table inside my database. So clicking on my database name, I can now go to the SQL tab and I can start creating the actual setup for my particular database table. So I'm going to go ahead and say I want to create table, and I want to call this one profiles, parentheses, semicolon. And then I'm just going to move everything down just so we have everything on a new line. Now, what I want to have in here is going to be all the different columns inside this table here. And we have to kind of think, what do we need to have inside this profile page when it comes to the profile page itself? So for example, I want to have an ID for the actual tables, because every time we create a new user, they have to have a profile table as well that actually matches with their username. So what I want to do here is I want to create a profiles ID. So I'm going to say profiles _ ID. And again, there's many different naming conventions when it comes to creating tables. You can do whatever you want here. I'm just going to go ahead and write profiles _ ID. And I'm going to go ahead and make this into a integer. It's going to be not null. And then I want to set it to auto _ increment, which basically means that it's automatically going to update every single time a new user actually gets signed up into the website. Going to the next line, the next thing we want to have is a about section that has some about text. So what I want to do here is I want to say profiles _ about. I want to make this into a text type, and we're going to set this one to not null, comma. The next one is going to be about the intro title. So I'm just going to copy paste, and instead of about, I'm going to say this one is going to be intro title. And the next one is going to be the intro text. Now the last column here is going to be the actual user who owns this particular profile. So what I want to do here is I actually want to create what is called a foreign key, which basically means that we're creating a column that references a particular piece of data from within another table inside our database, which is going to be within the users table. So what I want to do is I actually want to delete all of this because we didn't actually need to copy paste. And I want to create a users _ ID. I want to set this one to a integer data type and write comma. The next thing I want to do is I want to declare which one is going to be the primary key for this particular table. Now we could go up here and just write primary key like this. This will work perfectly fine inside this particular table here. But what I can also do, just to show it, because this is how we did it last time, I think we did, is we can also do it in another way. So if I go down to the bottom here, I can write primary key, and I can simply go inside parentheses and actually type the name of the particular column that is going to be the primary key. So in this case here, it's going to be profiles ID, comma, next line. And now I want to reference the foreign key. So right now, this particular column here is going to be our foreign key, meaning that when I go down here, foreign key, I want to tell it that this particular column here is going to be our foreign key inside this table, and it's going to references a particular column from within another table. And we can simply do that by referencing the table, so users, parentheses, and then the name of the particular column inside that table, so _ ID. And this is all we need to have in order to create this table. Do remember not to have a comma at the end here on the last line. So with this, let's actually go ahead and copy it just so we have it saved in case something happens. And let's go ahead and submit it. So now you can see inside my database here, I have two different tables. I have a profiles and I have a users. And just to show you, if I were to go inside my users table, I do have a users ID here, which is the unique ID for my user that I'm referencing to inside my foreign key inside the profile table. So just so you know exactly what we're referencing there, so we know that, oh, okay, so this particular user here belongs to this particular table over here. Now, just notice that because I'm using a larger monitor than most people are most likely using, because this is a 2K monitor, not a 1920 by 1080 monitor. So if I were to zoom in, this is most likely how your website is going to look like. So just so you can see something inside my browser here, I'm just going to go and zoom in for you. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to go inside my classes pages that we created, and I actually want to just do like the beginning intro to those classes. So we have the actual classes created and their names, and if they have to extend to certain other classes, then I want to include that as well. So going inside our profileinfo.classes.php, so the model page, essentially, I want to go in here and I want to actually create the class for this particular one. Now, we don't need to have a PHP closing tag. I do get asked that quite often whenever I create these pages here. There's a couple of different errors that can happen if you have a closing tag at the end here, and then you accidentally write something afterwards. So it's better not to have it in order for anything bad not to happen, okay? So with this, I'm gonna go and create a class. I'm gonna call this one profile.info, and I want to extend to my database table, because right now inside my database classes here, you can actually see that I have a database class that can link to my database inside PHP My Admin. So what I want to do is I want to go inside my profileinfo.classes, and I want to say I extend to DBH and simply close off the class here. Then I want to copy this, go inside my profile controller class, paste it in, and then I want to change the name from profile info to profile info controller. And then of course I want to extend to another class because the controller is not going to have access to the database. So I want to say profile info controller, CONTR, and I want to extend to my model page, which is profile info, because remember, our controller page is going to be the one that actually handles interaction from the user. So whenever I go to the website to click something or change something, then this class is going to handle all of that. But in order to actually make the changes, it has to tell our model class to actually make the database changes. I can copy paste this again and go inside my view class, paste it in, and instead of profile info controller, I want to say profile info view. And then I want to extend to profile info as well. Now, this is a moment where we have to talk a bit about the MVC model, because I know there's a couple of different ways that people like to do it. There is a diagram essentially over which classes should communicate with which classes. The important thing here is that you know that there's two different ways of doing the MVC model. So whichever way I might do it, I'm still going to have half the people in the comments telling me, oh, you're doing it wrong, you have to do it the other way. But there's two ways to do it. Okay, and we're going to do it my way in this video here. So if your college professor told you to do it the other way, just do it the other way if you want to do that. It really doesn't matter. It's just a design pattern for people to better be able to see what is going on in other people's code. So, it's not a wrong way of doing it. It's just, two different ways of doing it. So yeah. A small rant there, but I just wanted to talk about it because I know some people are going to get confused and they're going to write in the comments that, oh, that's not how my professor taught me to do it. And, I just want to make sure that we're on the same page, that there is different ways of doing it. So the way we're going to do the MVC model is going to be where the model class talks to the database. Then we have the controller class, which handles user input from the user inside the website. And that one is going to talk to our model class. And then the view class talks directly to the model class. And this is where the two methods differ, because in the other method, the view class talks to the controller class, which then talks to the model class, which is an extra step. And I don't like doing that extra step. So just immediately here, I want to get started on actually creating these methods. So we just have them so we can, just grab them whenever we need to use them. So I'm going to create a protected method. It's just a protection method for us to actually keep the data safe. So none of the other classes that we have in here that doesn't extend to this class can't access these methods here because they shouldn't. So we're just going to keep this one as protected. Then I'm going to say function. I'm going to create a name for this function here. This one is going to be get profile info. Now the parameter is going to be the user ID of the user that is logged into the website. So I'm just going to say that we have a variable called user ID. And then inside the method, we're going to go and create a prepared statement. Now, prepared statements is just a safer way for us to interact with the database. So essentially, we're handling the request differently from the actual SQL statement that we're creating inside our code. So what I want to do here is I want to create a variable. I'm going to call this one stmt for statement. And I'm going to set this one equal to this, which means that we're referencing to this class here or any other classes that we extend to. So that means that we can reference to any methods or properties from within this class or from within our database class. So by referencing to this, I can grab the connect method from within our database class. So if we were to go in here, you can actually see that we have it. So right here, we have a connect method, and that's the one I'm grabbing. So going back in here, I can say that we want to prepare our prepared statement, and then I can pass in a SQL string. So in this case here, I want to select something from my database. I just want to select everything from the database, or not from the database, but from the table within that database. So in this case, it's going to be from profiles where users underscore ID is equal to question mark. And then, of course, we do also want to close off the SQL statements. Now, in some cases, I do get asked, why do we have a closing semicolon at the end here? And why do we also keep one inside the actual SQL statement? Well, if you were to write this inside our database, you would actually put a closing semicolon at the end there. So you do need to do the same thing inside this statement here. Now, the question mark is a placeholder, essentially. So because we submit this in 2 different iterations, we add an extra level of security to actually, handling data inside the database. So afterwards here, what I want to do is I want to create an if statement, and I simply want to go in and check if this statement here fails. Maybe because I created a typo or something inside one of these names here, or the column doesn't exist inside the database. Then I want to actually be told that this is an error that we ran into. So inside my if statement here, I can actually do 2 things at the same time. I can both check if this actually fails, but I can also actually run the SQL statement at the same time. So what I can do is I can say I have this statement that I just created up here, and I want to reference to a method called execute. Inside the execute parentheses, we can pass in an array, which is the placeholder right now, that is the question mark. Then I can pass that into the array here. So in this case here, it is going to be user's ID that I'm passing into the method here. And it's just simply going to take that and replace the question mark with that once we do actually execute it here. So what I can do is I can actually ask for this to be true, or I can ask for this to fail. And if it fails, then I want to go inside the if statement and I want to actually reset the statement. So I can say statement is going to be equal to null. And then I can also go ahead and send the user back using a header method to another page. So in this case here, I can actually copy paste what I have from my notes here. I want to send them to a location. So this location colon is important to have in here. And then you just simply include a path you want to send them to. So in this case here, I want to send them to profile.php question mark error equal to statement failed. And in this sort of way, we can see inside the URL what exactly went wrong inside our statement here or inside our method. So what I can do as well is I want to write a exit method. So if we do actually run into this if statement and it actually turns out to have met the condition, so we actually run this code in here, then we want to exit the entire method so we don't continue with any other code that is below here. By the way, this is a very good way for us to not have nested statements inside each other. So essentially what I could have done is I could have deleted this, then I could have said else if, and then started creating code in here. And then, we would start having these nested long if conditions after each other. So in order to not have that, we can actually just do this instead, and we can minimize our code quite a bit. So afterwards, what I want to check for is if we do actually have this succeed, did we actually get any data from the database? So I create a if statement, and in here, I want to check if our statement has a row count. So this is actually a method we can point to as well. So row count, which is going to give us a number of rows that is returned from this particular query here. So if this one is equal to 0, meaning that we didn't get any data from the database, then I want to go in and do the exact same thing. So I want to set my statement to null. I do also want to send the user back with another error message, and I want to exit this method here so we don't continue running the code below. So in this case here, we don't want to say statement failed. We just want to say something like profile not found, just so we know exactly what is going on in here. So if none of these failed, it means that we do actually have some data. So I can go below here, create a variable, and I'm going to go ahead and call this one profile data. And I'm going to set it equal to the actual data that we got from the query. So I'm going to say that, oh, I can actually see I'm getting an error message here. Did I accidentally delete something? I may have. We have to say prepare in order to actually prepare the statement here. So what I want to set it equal to is going to be the statement that we just executed or queried inside our database. And I want to use a method called fetch all. And then I want to tell it how I want to fetch the data. So in this case here, I just want to say I want to use a PDO method, and I want to fetch this one as an associative array when we do actually get it. So we can say fetch underscore assoc, which is fetch it as an associative array. What this basically just means is that when I grab the data from the database and actually have to use it inside my code and reference to the data, I want to be able to reference to the data based on the column names inside the database. So if I want to get the users underscore ID, then I can just write users underscore ID, and then I'll get that particular piece of data. So it's just a very neat way of grabbing it that way. So the last thing I want to do here is I actually want to return some data. In this case, I want to return my profile data, so we can actually return the data once we reference to this method here. So I can just say I want to return profile data. And that is basically all we need to have for this particular method here. Now, like I said, we do have a second method that is going to allow for us to update data inside the database. What I want to do there is I want to go down and create a new method. I can actually just copy paste the one that we have here, paste it in. And what I want to do is I, of course, want to change the name. So instead of saying get profile info, I want to say set profile info. Actually, we can go ahead and say set new, because we're not going to set it, we're actually going to update it. But now we do also need to change the data inside the parameter, because right now we are passing in the user ID because we need to use that for inside the previous method. But in this case here, we do actually want to pass in 4 pieces of data. So the first piece of information I want to pass in is going to be the profile about. So we're going to say profile about. And this is basically just the about section inside the profile page. So the second one here is going to be the profile title. So just going to say profile title. And the third one is going to be our profile text. And then we of course want to make sure there's spaces after the commas here. So we have 4 pieces of data: profile about, profile title, profile text, and then the user ID. So once we pass these in, we can actually go ahead and start making changes to the statement that we have here. So what I want to do is I want to say we have this statement that we're preparing. We want to connect to our database. We want to prepare this prepared statement and submit it. In this case here, we're not doing a select statement, so we can actually go and delete that. We're going to do a update SQL statement. And I want to say I want to update profiles, which is the table we just created. And I want to update it and set profiles about. So profiles underscore about. And I want to set it equal to question mark, because again, we're doing a prepared statement here. So this is going to be a placeholder. Then I'm going to paste it in, and I want to change it to not saying profiles about, but profiles intro title, which is what we named that column inside the database. And we're basically just going to do this for all the different columns here. So we're going to paste in one more time. We're going to say we want to change profiles intro text. And again, just to show it, if we were to go inside my database here, we're basically just going inside our profiles table and referencing to all these different names that we have in here. And those are the ones that we're changing right now. And after we're changing these pieces of data, after the last comma here, what I want to do is I want to go ahead and delete the comma because we don't need to add more data. And I want to say we want to change it where our users underscore ID is equal to question mark and then semicolon, because we have to remember the semicolon after the SQL statement. What you can do here, by the way, if you want to wrap this on 2 lines, is you can actually just hold down Alt-Z on your keyboard, or you can go up here inside View and then go down to where it says Word Wrap and just activate it here. So in that way, we're not like sliding off the screen there. Then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go inside the actual if statement that checks if this statement actually fails or if it succeeds. If it fails, then we of course want to send the user back to a particular page. In this case here, it is going to be the same page with the same message. So we know exactly what went wrong here. And we do want to change what we pass into our execute statement here, because right now we actually have 4 pieces of data that we need to submit. So I'm going to go ahead and copy these and paste them inside instead. So we paste in and submit the right pieces of data to this statement up here where we have the placeholders. And we can actually go and delete everything else that is below here. We do need to do one more thing, which is actually to reset our statement. So we can actually say our statement is going to be equal to null at the end here, just to make sure we close off the statements. So after creating an update so people can actually go into the website and update the info inside the profile page, we do also need to add one more thing, because once people actually sign up to the website, we do need to create a profile inside the profile table for that user as soon as they sign up. So we do need to have one more inside the model class. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to scroll down and add another one, and it's going to be very similar to the one that we have right here. So I'm just going to copy paste the update one, paste it in below, and instead of saying set new profile info, we're just going to say set profile info. Now we will be passing in the same data as in the previous one because it's the exact same information that we want to insert into the table, so, you know, just like when we updated. So we're just going to keep the parameters that we have inside the method here. And we do also want to create a prepared statement because we want to do this in a safe way. However, we do need to change the SQL statement because we don't want to update, but we want to insert into the database. So what I can do here is I can just go ahead and delete everything that we have inside our SQL statement. And I'm just going to go ahead and create an insert statement instead. So in this case here, we're going to say insert into profiles, because that's the one we want to insert data into. And I'm going to go ahead and insert the column names that we want to insert data into. So in this case here, we want to say profiles about. We do also have one called profiles underscore intro title. And we do also have one called profiles underscore intro text. And we do have a last one, which is going to be the one that we have up here, which is the user ID, because that's the last column inside this particular table here, which was the foreign key from inside the other table called users. So we want to also make sure we insert into users underscore ID. Now I'm just going to go ahead and text wrap this so we don't see this in one big straight line. So it wraps down to the next line here, just so we have a little bit more of an overview over what we're writing here. Afterwards, we want to include some values because we actually want to insert values into these different columns here. And we want to just go ahead and say parentheses, question mark, comma, question mark, comma, question mark, comma, question mark, because all of these are going to be placeholders, just like in the last one above, that we're going to then insert inside the execute method that we have down here. So once we have this, we can actually go ahead and we'll just keep everything like it is because we want to insert the exact same data into these question marks up here. So we don't actually need to change anything. So we're pretty much done here. And what I want to do now is I want to go inside my controller class and actually handle input from the user. Because remember, the model class is just for updating and inserting and getting data from the database. But we do actually need to have some sort of method that handles the input from the user. So what I want to do here is I want to go inside my controller class, and we want to do a couple of things that are a little bit different from the model class, because just like with the login system episode, when it comes to creating a controller class, typically we have something called a constructor, which is a method that actually handles creating data once we create an object based on this class here. So remember, a class is basically just a blueprint, and we can create as many objects from it as we can, as long as it's not a static class. So what I want to do here is I want to create a couple of private fields, or properties, as we also call them in PHP. It's kind of been messing my brain a little bit because it's not typical that we call fields properties when it comes to other languages like C# or C++. So just know that when I refer to fields, I'm talking about properties in PHP, because most people probably know the term properties when they talk about these inside PHP. So we have these fields here, and I'm going to call the first one user ID. Then I'm going to create a second one, so I'm just going to copy paste, which is also going to be private. So I'm going to go ahead and call the second one UID, which is the username. Now, if that doesn't really make sense to you, if I were to go back inside my PHP.MyAdmin, you can actually see that inside my users table, I have a ID for each row inside the table. And we do also have a users UID, which is the username for all the users. So that's just how I decide to name things inside my particular project here. So if you called it username or something, just go ahead and refer to username instead inside your code. It's really up to you. Like, nothing is set in stone when we do these tutorials here. You can rename things however you want to. If something that I think makes sense doesn't make sense to you, you can always just call this one username instead or something. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and create the constructor method, because like I said, we do have a construct method that actually assigns data to these fields inside our class here. So what I'll do is I'll create a public function, and this one is a construct built-in method that we have inside our PHP language. So we say underscore twice, and then we say construct, parentheses, and curly brackets. Now inside of here, we want to tell it what kind of data we want to pass into this constructor here. We're going to be passing in the ID of the user and the username of the user, because that might be helpful a bit later on once we do actually want to start using methods inside this class here. But I should also mention that with the username being passed in, if you're sitting here with a different login system that isn't the one that we created in the last episode, I just want to point out that inside my login classes.php, which is the one that handles the login of the user when we do actually log into the website, when we do actually log in the user, I create two session variables. I create one for the ID of the user, and I do also save the username of the user inside a session. So I do have both of these inside session variables, which is why I can pass them inside this constructor here. So if you only save the user ID in your version of your login system, make sure that you also save the username of the person inside a session variable. So a small tweak you have to do to your own if you're sitting here with your own login system. But with that said, let's actually go and pass these in. So we're just going to say we're going to pass in a user ID. And again, if you're a little bit confused about what a constructor is, I do have an object-oriented PHP series on my channel, which I think is very understandable. I think is the right word to follow. So I know object-oriented PHP can be a little bit difficult for people who are just starting out, but I think that one explains things pretty well. So if you're confused about what a constructor is, what are these things, why do we have to assign them to these up here, then I have a course on my channel that explains that. So with that, we want to go inside our constructor, and I just simply want to reference to this class here. And I want to point to this user ID field that we have up here. And I want to set it equal to the data that we pass into the constructor, which is our variable called user ID. Now, don't get confused about these names being the same. We could also just write something like this and then have that go in here, and this would still be the exact same thing. It's just because I want the names to be the same so I know which ones to assign them to, because these are data that we pass in and these are actually the field data. So these two are completely different things, but they're going to have the same data inside of them, just so you don't get confused here. So with that, let's actually go and just copy this assigned field here and pass in the UID instead. And with this, we now have a constructor. And again, it just basically means that whenever we're creating an object based on this class here, the data that we pass into the object when we create it the first time, when we instantiate the object, is going to get passed in to the fields that we have inside the class. So the class has data inside of it. The next thing I want to do is I want to create a couple of methods that are going to work for this particular class here. Now, the first method that we're going to be creating is the one that actually goes in and works together with the last method we created inside the previous class, that is going to include some default information to the user when they sign up for the first time. So basically, when the user goes in and signs up, we want to make sure that there's just something written in, like a welcoming message for the new person that just created this account, or something inside their profile page, just so we don't have like nothing at all. Again, if people are confused about what I'm talking about, let me just show it here. The things that we're going to change based on, whatever the user types into the profile is going to be the about section down here where we have some text. We're also going to make the user able to change the title up here of the introduction, as well as the message below the introduction. And these has to have some default text. Otherwise, they're just going to be empty and have nothing in it once the user signs up. So in this case here, I have some text already. This is my default text that I want people to see once they actually log into the website, or log into the user, it's called. So what I want to do is I want to go back inside Visual Studio Code, and I want to create a method that is going to be a public function. And we're going to go ahead and call this one default profile info, just so we have something that makes sense to whatever we're making here. So what I want to do now is I want to create 3 variables inside this method here. The first one I'm going to call profile about, and I'm just going to set it equal to just nothing for now. And I'm just going to copy paste this down 3 times or 2 times. So we have 3 of them essentially. And inside the first one, I'm just going to go ahead and copy paste in a piece of text that I wrote beforehand that is going to be the welcoming message for people. Again, if you want to text wrap, Alt set on your keyboard so you can pop it down to the next line. And then for the second one, I do actually have something slightly different, because I actually want the user to be able to see the username when they actually log in. So it's going to say, hi, I am, and then the username of the person who's actually logged in. So the way we can do that is, again, because we also passed in the username inside this class here, we can actually refer to the username using this and then point to the field inside the class. So once we create an object based on this class here, we're going to pass in the username and the ID, which means that we can now actually use the username inside our methods down here. So that's why we can actually reference to the username. So with that, I do also have another welcoming message that is going to be for the text that is below the title. So with that pasted in, I'm just going to go ahead and save it. And then we want to reference to a method that we created inside our model class, which is going to be the bottom one down here called setProfileInfo. So I'm just going to go and copy it with the parentheses, go back in here. And what I want to do is I want to point to this class. And the reason we can do that is because we're extending to profile.info, which is the model class that we have that method inside of. So when I reference to this class, I'm referencing to this class and any classes we extend to, okay? So when I do that, I can point to this particular method that we have in there. And with that, we just want to double check that all the different names inside the parameters and inside the variables up here are correct, because they're not. So right now we want to be able to pass in profile about, which we do, because that's the name of the first one. Then we want profile title, which is not the name of the second one. So make sure you change that. Profile text. And the last one is going to be the user ID, not the UID, but the ID. So what I can do here is I can actually say that we have the ID stored inside the class. So I can say we want to reference to this and then point to user ID, which is the name of the field up here. So with that, we can now save it, and we have some default info we can paste into the table once we sign up the user for the first time. By the way, do make sure you add a semicolon at the end here, just so we don't get any error messages. Now, at this point, we can actually already go in and make it so that inside our website, when the user signs up into the website for the first time, we actually create a profile for them at the same time. But let's just go ahead and finish up the controller class, because I think it's a little bit more clean for this tutorial, at least for the sake of you guys, that we actually finish up the controller class. Otherwise, we're going to like jump back and forth between things. So just doing everything and finishing it up at one time, I think it's a little bit more comprehensive when it comes to teaching this. So let's go ahead and go down below our default profile info. And the next thing I want to do is I want to create a function or a method that is going to update our actual information when the user goes into the profile page and types in new information they want to update inside their profile. So what I want to do here is I want to create a public function, and I want to call this one update profile info. Update profile info, parentheses, curly brackets. And we want to pass in the information here that we want to update inside this user. So what I can do is I can actually go ahead and say that I have a about, an intro title, and an intro text that I want to pass in and update inside the database. So I'm going to create a variable called about. And I'm also going to go ahead and create a variable called intro. And then we're going to create a variable called text. Let's actually go ahead and call this one intro title and then intro text. I think that makes sense. Intro text. Inside this method here, we're going to do a couple of things. First, we want to run any kind of error handlers that we want to run inside our method, which means that, when the user types something in and submits it, we might want to check whatever they typed in for various things. And just like with the login example in the previous episode, I gave you some examples of how to check different things. You can just sort of come up with a bunch of things yourself. The one that I want to check for in this case here, just to, check for something, is going to be to see if the inputs are empty once they actually type something in. Because if the inputs are empty, then we might not want them to submit this into the database, because otherwise, things are going to be empty inside their page. So there has to be something in there. So what I want to do in here is I actually want to go down and create a separate method that only checks for empty inputs, because in case I want to reuse this at some point inside my class, it's just kind of nice to have that as a separate method that we can reuse again and again. So what I want to do here is I want to create a private method. And the reason we want to make it private is because it's only this particular class here that is going to be using this method. So there's no need to make it protected or public or anything like that. So we're just going to make it private, and I'm going to say function. I'm going to call this one empty input check or something, parentheses. And then I want to pass in the same 3 parameters that we have in here, because these are the 3 that we're actually checking for. So after that, we say curly brackets. And then inside of here, I want to create a variable called result, because this one is going to contain the true or false statements on whether or not the input has been passed when it comes to checking for empty fields. So we're going to go down to the next line. And I want to simply run a if statement that is going to check for these empty inputs. So we want to run a method called empty, parentheses. And then we just simply pass in the parameters one at a time. So we check is about empty when they actually submit the data, or is the next one empty? So we can actually copy paste this a couple of times. So we have 3 of them. Make sure there's no pipe symbols at the end here, because we don't want to do that at the end. And I'm just going to go ahead and pass in the other 2. So now if any of these are empty, then I want to go in and assign variable result to false. Actually, it might make more sense if we write this one as true, because we're simply checking for an empty input. So if we say true, then people would think, oh, okay, so it is empty, right? So with that logic, let's actually go ahead and make it true instead. And then we're going to write a else statement. And then we're just simply going to set this one to false. And then at the very end, we just simply return the variable to actually, be able to tell if this is a true or false statement. So once we have this, we can actually refer to empty input check inside this other method we were creating. So up here, just to write a comment, we can say error handlers, just so you know exactly that this is where you need to create error handlers for this particular example, in case you want to create more of these. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to the next line, and I'm going to run a if statement. And I'm simply going to check for this particular method that we have down here. So I'm just going to copy paste it. And inside the if statement, I'm going to refer to this class and then point to the method that we just created below here. And then we simply want to check if it's equal to true. Because if this one is equal to true, it means that there is an error, because we don't want to submit empty inputs. And then we just want to send the user back with an error message, essentially. So there is a header function, just like we did before. I'm just going to copy paste it in. So essentially, this is a header function that sends the user back to a location. And then you include the path to where you want to send them to. So in this case, I want to send them back to profilesettings.php, which is a page that we haven't created yet. That is going to be the page that I have inside my website here. So if we were to go to profile settings, this page here is where I'm sending them back with an error message. So what we can do is simply close it off down here at the bottom. And I want to close it with a exit method, because if this one actually turns out to be true, then I want to shut off this entire script that is running, because we don't want to continue any further if this one is true. So what we'll do below here is we'll make another comment, just so you know that this is where the error handlers stop, and this is where we actually run the actual creation of this profile for the user. So we're just going to say update profile info, and then we simply refer to this. And then we simply point to one of the other methods we have inside our profile info class, which is the model class for our project here. So going in here, we have one up here called set new profile info, which is the update method. So I'm just going to point to that one and copy it, go back in, paste it in, and then we just want to make sure that all the different properties inside the parameters down here are spelled correctly. So in this case, we're actually passing in about, so not profile about. Again, you could also change this one up here to profile about if you wanted to. Let's just go ahead and rename the properties down here depending on what we wrote inside our method here. So we're just going to paste it in, intro text. And the last one here is of course also going to be this class we're pointing to, and then the user ID from within this class here. So again, just to mention it for people who are new to PHP, any sort of error handlers that you want to include inside this particular method here to check if there is, a certain number of characters they use, because you might have a requirement for that. If you want to check for profanity or anything else like that, then you just go ahead and copy paste them below here one at a time until you pass through all the different checks. And then you do this method down here at the end to actually update the info. And again, you can just paste your code directly in here below, or you can do like I just did and create a different method for each one of them that returns a true or false statement. So you can just kind of like use this method down here as a template and just check for something else inside the if statement. And that's basically just what you need to do. You do need to do some thinking yourself, So what we'll do here is, with all of this created, I want to actually set it up inside our website so that when we sign up for the first time, it creates a profile for the user. In order to do that, we do actually need to make changes to our signup class, or not the signup class, but the signup.inc.php file, which is going to be the one that we actually send the user to once we submit the signup form. So inside my signup.inc.php file, you can see that right now, basically when we get sent here, we want to check for certain things. We want to actually grab the data from our post method at the top when we send the data to this page. And again, just in case you're confused here, if I were to go inside my index page, when we do actually submit the form inside our index page, let's say we go down to the sign up form, which is right here. When I actually send the information from the form, I send it to my includes folder inside a signup.inc.php file, which is just a separate PHP file that we send the data to. And then inside that file, we refer to all the different methods we want to use in order to do something with the data that gets sent to this file here. So going inside our signup.inc.php, you can see that we actually check for a post submit. Now, this is not actually done the most optimal way. I should have done this differently in the previous episode, and let's just actually go ahead and fix this. What you actually want to check for here is not an isSet method. It's not really seen as best practice. It's not wrong, and it's still going to do the job for you. But you do want to check for a post request method, which means you're basically checking if this page has been accessed using a post submit from inside a form. This is seen as the technically correct way. Okay, so do this instead. If you want to do the same thing inside your login.inc.php file, you can actually see that, oh, we have the same thing here. You can actually swap these out as well, just so you know that you should probably do that. Now, you do also want to do another thing for security purposes that I did not do in the last episode. Again, I was skipping over quite a bit of security in the last video, and I think that some of these needs to be included inside this video here because people were talking about it in the comments. So I do think that we need to do just basic security so people don't skip past them and think that, oh, okay, so we can just do this and then it's going to be secure, which is not. So what I want to do here is I actually want to go inside my signup.inc.php and I want to use a HTML special characters check, which basically goes in and sanitizes our information that is submitted by the user so they don't accidentally post something that can go in and mess with our database. So basically it sanitizes special characters to convert them into a string so it doesn't become something that the database might accidentally interpret as a special character. So just go ahead and copy paste this inside all the other ones just to make sure that this is done for all the data that is submitted. So I'm going to change the second one, which is the password. I'm going to change the password repeat. I'm going to change the email. And we're just going to go and delete what we have here, like so, and like so. Do the same thing for your login, by the way, because if we're to again go inside my login, submit, then you can see we're not doing it here as well. So do make sure that you copy this, paste it inside your login, just to make sure we have it, and change the actual data. So it says UID and password, like so. This is going to be a security check that you should do every single time. So now that we corrected the things from the previous video, let's actually go ahead and get back to this tutorial here. So the next thing we want to do inside our signup.inc.php file is we actually want to grab the ID from the user that we just signed up inside the website. And then we want to create a profile for that user. And we can actually do that directly inside our signup controller class that we actually just referenced to when we signed up the person inside this file here. So from the last video where we talked about how to create a login system, we actually have a signup model class and we also have a signup controller class. So what I can do is I can go inside my signup.classes.php file, which we created in the last video, and we can actually go ahead and create a method in here that is going to allow for us to just go in and grab the ID of the user we just signed up. So at the very bottom here, I'm going to go down and create a new method, and I can actually go ahead and just copy paste the method we have inside our profile info model class. So if we were to go back inside profileinfo.classes.php, at the very top here, we do have a protected get profile info method. I can just copy this one, go back inside my signup.classes.php and paste this one in. And then we just change it to something like get user ID. And then instead of passing in the user ID, we're actually going to pass in the username, so the UID. And we of course do also want to change the select method down here. So we don't want to select everything from inside profiles, but instead we want to select the users underscore ID from inside our users table, where users UID is equal to question mark. And then I just simply want to pass in UID inside my array down here where we actually execute this SQL statement. So we don't pass in the ID because that's what we're trying to grab here. And with this created, we now want to go inside our signup controller class and actually create a method that just simply goes in and runs this particular method we just created. Because remember, we can't use the methods inside our model classes directly. So we do need the controller class to go in and actually do that for us. So scrolling down to the bottom of the signup controller class, we're just going to go and create a new method here. And what we're going to go ahead and create is a very simple method that is going to be public. And we're going to go ahead and call this one function fetch user ID. And we're just simply going to pass in UID inside as a parameter, because remember, we do need to pass in the username in order for this to actually work. So we pass in the UID, and then we simply go in and create a variable that we call user ID. And then we set it equal to the method we just created inside our signup.classes.php file. So we're going to reference to this class, which means this class and the model class, since we're actually extending to the signup model class. And then we're going to reference to the method we just created, which in this case was get user ID, parentheses, and semicolon. And do remember that we do want to take a parameter. So in this case, UID. So we're going to paste that in inside the parentheses here. And with that, we now just simply need to return this. So we're going to go in and say we want to return our user ID, which is up here. But we do want to return the first row of data that we actually get from the database and the column name that is going to be called users underscore ID. So now that we have this method here, we can actually copy it, because remember, inside our signup form, if we were to go inside signup.inc.php, we do already have a signup object created here once we did actually need to, sign up the user. So we can just reference that one directly. So we can go down here and say we want to run a signup. And we want to point to the method we just created called fetch user ID. And we want to pass in that information. And again, the username that we're passing in is going to be the username that we passed in when we actually signed up the first time, just so you know. And now, because we are returning a actual user ID, we probably need to actually save this inside a variable. So we're going to go ahead and say this one is going to be called user ID is going to be equal to this method that we just ran here. So now that we have this, we can actually go ahead and run some of the methods inside our profile info controller class, because now we actually need to create the profile inside our profile table. So what I want to do is I actually want to include the profile classes so we can actually use them. So we're just going to copy paste from here. And we can also create a comment just to be orderly here and actually, write things properly. So let's go and create a comment that says instantiate the profile. Actually, it's going to be profile info. controller, if we have to be technically correct here. So what I can do is I can go inside and actually say that we're not grabbing the signup, but we're actually grabbing the profile info classes, and we're also grabbing the profile info controller. And then just like we did up here with the signup, we're just basically going to create an object based on this class here. So we're just going to say, instead of signup, we're going to say profile info, maybe capitalize this because that makes sense. And then we want to create a new profile info. And we want to pass in the data that we want to, or that we need to pass in order for the constructor to actually create this object here. Because remember, going inside our profile info controller class, we do have a constructor up here that require that we have user ID and user UID in order for this to actually work. So because we went inside our signup controller class and actually created a separate method just to grab the user ID, we can now actually do that. So let's go and pass in the user ID inside as the first parameter. And then the username has to be the second parameter. So we actually got that one from up here. So we have the UID. We're just going to paste that one in. And with this, we can now actually create an object based off of the profile info controller class. It did kind of require us actually grabbing the ID up here first, but everything turned out fine. So what we'll do now is we'll simply run the method that actually creates the profile info inside the browser, inside our database. So what I'll do is I'll go in and say we have our profile info, and I want to point to a method that is called default profile info. Let's actually make sure we spell that correctly, default profile info. And we just want to point to that method there. And we don't need to pass in any parameters, because if I were to go back inside profile info controller, you can see that it takes no parameters. And this one is simply going to go into the database and sign up a default text inside our profile info, just so we have something when we actually create the profile for the user. So with that, we can now actually test this out. So let's go ahead and go back inside our website and test it. First of all, we do actually need to go back inside our database and delete the user we have already, because he does not have a profile attached to him. So we need to completely reset what we're doing here. So we're just going to go ahead and delete the user, go back inside our website, and I can actually go down here and just try and sign myself up again. So we're going to say 123, 123, type in an email, submit this, and we don't get any error messages, so that's good. So let's go ahead and go back inside the database, refresh everything. You can now see we have a user, and we also have inside profiles some default information about this user here. So we have the profiles about filled out, we have a hi I am Kosing as the title, and we also have the welcome to my profile page blah 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 text that we need to have under the title. But of course right now, if I were to go back inside my website here and actually sign myself up, so crossing 123, log in, you can now see that we don't actually have that written in here. Like these are all the stuff that we have inside the HTML page, or not the HTML page, but the HTML inside our profile page, because we didn't actually tell it. If we were to go back inside the files here, if I go inside my profile page, all of this is just HTML. So all the text you see is actually just, pure heart written HTML, because we didn't actually tell it to go in and grab the information from the database. So that's the next step we need to do. So the first thing we want to do here in order to actually gain access to all the different methods that we created when it comes to grabbing profile information and all that kind of stuff from inside the classes is we need to actually link to the classes inside this page here, just like we did with the signup.inc.php and all the different inc files we have. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just copy paste from my notes here, because this is going to be the exact same thing. So I want to link to the different classes that we have, which is going to be our profile info.classes, profile info-controller, and profile info-view. Now we do also need to do one more thing here, because right now we don't actually have access to the database. So we do also need to include our database file right on top of these classes here, just to make sure we can actually access the database. So with all these, we're going to go ahead and create a object based off the view. And the reason we're not going to do it off of the controller is because the controller is when we actually have an input that we want to change the database with, whereas when we want to grab something from the database and show it inside the website, then we want to use the view class that we created. So I'm going to go ahead and go down to the next line, and I'm going to create a variable called profile info. And I'm going to go ahead and set this one equal to a new instantiated object. And I'm going to call this one profile info view, because that is the class we're trying to access here, parentheses and semicolon. Now, right now, if I were to go inside my view class, we don't actually have anything in there because we haven't actually created anything for that particular class. So if I were to open it up here, just grab the view classes, you can see that right now it's empty. So the next thing we need to do before we can actually start swapping out content inside our profile page is to actually create these different methods and things that we want to actually use. Now in this example here, we're just going to go ahead and grab 3 different things from inside our database. We're going to grab the about, we're going to grab the title, and we're going to grab the text that is going to be beneath the title. So what I'll do is I'll create a public function, which means we're creating a public method. Let's actually make sure we spell that correctly. And I'm going to go and call this one fetch about. Now inside of this one, I'm going to pass in a piece of data, which is going to be the user ID, which right now, because we're logged into the website, is stored inside a session variable. So we're just going to say user ID, and let's actually make sure we spell things correctly. So not fetch, but fetch about. What I'll do in here is I'll go and create a variable called profileInfo. I know we love using this particular name for our variables, but since we're inside different scopes, we can actually go and do that. Now profileInfo is going to be equal to this class, or any classes we extend to, which in this case here is going to be profileInfo, which is our model class that actually accesses the database and allow for us to grab data from it. So I'm going to go and grab a method called getProfileInfo, parentheses, semicolon, and we're going to go and pass in the user ID. Now this particular method here we should already have created. So if I were to actually go inside my model class, which is over here, then you can see we do have one called getProfileInfo, which simply goes into the database and fetches everything from profiles based on what the ID of the user is. So what I can do is I can go back inside my view class here, and below here, we're just going to go and echo out the result that we want to echo out from this one. So I can go ahead and say echo, and we can just go and echo out this variable that we created up here. And do remember, we do actually return this as a multi-dimensional array, which means that we need to go in and say that we want to grab the first row of data that is returned from the database. And then we want to give it a name for the column that we actually want to grab. So in this case here, we want to grab the about, which is called profiles_about. And then we just do a semicolon at the end here. And this is pretty much all we need to do here. So what I can do is I can copy paste this a couple times, and I'm just going to go and change the name. So instead of fetch about, we're going to say fetch title. We're going to go and change the last one down here to fetch text. And then we of course want to change the actual columns that we're grabbing. So in the first one, it's going to be about. In the second one, we're going to go and grab the intro title. And then the third one is going to be our intro text. And again, if you're confused about these names here, these are the names that we have inside the database columns. So if we were to go back inside the database, you can now see, if I actually grab it here, if I go inside my profiles table, you can see that these are the names that we have inside the columns here, just so you don't get confused about what these names are. So going back inside our profile.php file, we can now actually grab methods from within this little object that we created up here, because we just created some. So what I can do is I can scroll down to where we actually want to swap out content with the database stuff. And I can actually say that we want to swap out this part right here, which is just the placeholder text that I inserted when I started creating something here. So what I want to do, I want to make sure we take all the text, not the PHP tags, and I delete them, and then I move the PHP tags down to the next line, and then I open up my PHP code in between, like so. And then we can simply go in and actually call upon the method, since we're already echoing out inside the view class. So what I can do is I can reference to this object we created up here, and I can go inside the object and point to a specific method. So in this case here, fetch about, parentheses. And we do want to make sure that we pass in the session ID that we're using right now. So we're going to go ahead and grab the super global called variable_session. Brackets, and inside the brackets we're just going to go ahead and tell it what we want to grab. So in this case here, it's the user ID, which by the way we have stored inside these session variables because we're logged into the website. And what we can do here is basically just copy paste. So I can copy what we have here with the PHP tags. I can go down to the next place and say, okay, so we have the title here. So let's go ahead and delete what we have. Go down to the next line and paste it in. Make sure everything is actually moved out so it looks properly. And then we're just going to change what we want to fetch. So in this case, it's not about, but it's title. And then we're going to go down to the next place, which is right below it. So we're just going to go and delete all the text that we have here, like so. Move it down to the next line and paste it in. And then we're just going to change the name of the method that we're trying to grab here. So in this case here, it's not title, but text. Now we do also have one other place that I actually did not change inside my example, inside the finished version that I showed you, because right now inside the profile image, we do have a username at the very top. So as you can see, we have a username up here. We might want to swap that out as well, so it's not static. So what I want to do is I can simply go in here and say that I want to take this username, and we're just going to do the exact same thing. We're going to paste in. But instead of grabbing something from the database, let's just go ahead and echo out a session variable. So I can actually just go and delete, say echo, and then we're going to echo a session variable called not user ID, but user UID. And with this saved, we can now go back inside the website, refresh it. And now I can see we changed all the content in here based on who the user is. Right now, the username up here in the top corner. We do also have the actual title and text that we wrote in here. And the about section is also changed. So everything from the database is actually getting shown inside our website now. So what we want to do now is once I click profile settings, I want to be able to change the content of my page, because that is a very good feature to have when you allow people to actually create customized text. So what I want to do is I want to go back inside my website here, and I'm going to go ahead and create a new page. So inside my root folder, I'm just going to go ahead and say that I want to create a new file. I'm going to call this one profilesettings.php. And inside profile settings, I'm just going to go ahead and copy paste everything that we have from within, let's say, the profile page. We can just take that one. So copy and paste. Now we do need to get rid of some of the things in here. For example, we don't actually need to have all these classes included at the very top, because that is when we want to show something inside the page. Actually, there's one thing we can do here. So let's actually go ahead and undo that, because we could actually grab something here. So let's go and keep that for now. What I'll do is I'll go back down and I'm just going to go ahead and delete everything that I have in here when it comes to the actual body of my page. So I'm just going to delete that entire section. And what I want to do now is, again, just create some HTML that is going to allow for me to actually go in and just customize my page in any sort of way. As you can see, if I were to go back inside my website here, right now I can see it's just a basic HTML container that has a small title up here that says profile settings. I have a small paragraph that just says change your about section here, and then a small form that is just going to allow for me to type something in. And then we also, inside this form, also have an input down here for the title. And then we also have another text field for the, the text right below the title. So we can change that as well. And then we can just simply submit the form here. So this is one big form that we're then just submitting. So if I were to go back inside my HTML and just copy paste from my own page here for a second, you can actually see that this is not actually very complicated. This is everything that I have inside my example here. If I just make sure everything shoves down to the next line, you can actually see everything. So basically just, basic stuff. We have a very basic form here. This is actually bare minimum of what you need to have. You don't actually need to have all this stuff. You don't need to have this either. You just need to have the form, essentially. And we're just going to go ahead and go over the form here, because I do think that's relevant for you when no matter if you're making your own customized website or whatever you might be doing, the form is a good idea to go over so you can actually see what is going on here. So when it comes to the form, let's actually undo the text wrap and just scroll out here. You'll notice that inside my form, I have an action that is right now set to a page called includes/profileinfo.inc.php. And then we have a method set to post. So we do need to create what is called a profileinfo.inc.php file in order to actually submit this later on. We do also have a text area, which is just basically going to allow for people to go in and actually write some text. So in this case, I just have a text area. I have a name that is set to about. I have 10 rows, 30 columns. And then I just created a placeholder here. Now the placeholder should actually be replaced by what we have inside the database, because in case the user wants to go down and, just change one of the sections and type something in. So just to give you an example here, if I go back inside the website and I want to change some of the content inside my profile page, because everything right now is one form, if I were to go down inside my title and change the title and submit it, I'm going to leave all the other ones blank, which means that we don't have any text inside our profile page. So what I want to do is I want to paste in what we already right now have inside the database into these, so we can actually have something in here to edit once we go in here. So what I want to do is just kind of finish talking about the form here, and then we'll do that afterwards. So after this one text area, I just created a couple of breaks, and then I created another title for the next section. And then I said that this was going to be a input type that has a type set to text. Name is going to be intro title. That is important because that's how we grab data later on. And we do also have a placeholder for it, which again is just the default text that we have inside the actual input. And then the last one is going to be another text area. So basically the same thing as the first one. We just give it a name. In this case, it's going to be intro text. It's going to have rows, columns, and a placeholder. And make sure you have the closing text area tag after both of these up here. So after that, you just simply include a button that is going to be a submit type, and give it a name set to submit, and then you just create some text inside the button here. So with all this is bare minimum of what you need to have when it comes to the HTML in here, just this one form that has these settings here. Again, we talked about forms for like many times by now. So creating a HTML form is not something that is new. It's not something that's PHP related. This is actually just HTML and CSS. So you should know how to do this. But just in case there was any new people here, I thought it was a good idea just to kind of like explain the form here. So what we're going to do is I do actually want to swap in some of the content. So right now we're actually grabbing data from inside our database. We don't actually need this controller class both in here and inside the previous one. So we could actually just go ahead and delete this one since we're not actually using method from within them. Let's go back to the profile page and just go ahead and delete that one too, because why have it if we're not using it, right? So we're just going to save it, go back inside profile settings. Now we could actually just go inside profile.php and just copy paste what we have in there. So let's actually go and do that. So I'm just going to copy paste the PHP where we actually, let's actually grab the right one, where we actually go in and actually fetch some information inside our view class that we have in here. So I'm just going to copy paste this, go back inside profile settings, and then we can actually go in here and actually, paste in all the information from the database. So the way we want to do that is, first of all, we want to go inside our text area. And as you can see, we have this text area that we close off here. So we can actually go down to the next line, paste in our PHP tags, and then we can just simply fetch the about, which is right now what we're actually doing just by pasting in. So what I can do is I can also go down to the next one, which is my last text area here. Let's do that one first. Go down to the next line, paste it in, and then we can actually fetch not the about, but the text from inside my database. The last one we have here is a input type, and when it comes to inputs, we want to do what is called a value. So in this case here, we want to say value is going to be equal to double quotes. And then we actually want to go ahead and split this apart and insert some PHP code in here. So what I want to do is I just want to paste in here. And let's actually move everything on one line. I think that would make everything a little bit easier when it comes to this particular one. So let's just go ahead and do that. So right now you can actually see that my value just have the opening PHP tag and the closing one at the end here. And then we just simply write PHP in between. So that's one way you can do it as well if you don't like having things in separate lines. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the text in here. So it's not fetch about, but fetch title. So what I can do, I know I say that a lot, I can do, but we can do things, right? So what I can do is I can go back inside my website, go down to my profile settings, and then you can actually see that it inserts content in here that we actually have from inside the database. Now it is doing something a little bit weird here where it's leaving some empty space, so we kind of need to figure out why it's doing that. Okay, so the reason we have a little bit of white space when it comes to the website here is actually because of the way I just set it up inside my HTML. So let's go back inside our text area. And because we have all this white space, all this stuff that you see right here is apparently being counted in as white space inside the website. We do need to actually just jump back and put everything on one line, just like we did with the input, but it's going to be within the, in between the text area tags. So we're just going to go ahead and go back to the next line here. Make sure everything is on one line and like so. So just to show you, after the opening tag of the text area stops, we have all the content inside the PHP, and then we have the closing text area here. So we do need to do this in order to not get that white space. So let's do the same thing here. Move the text area to the next line here. Do the same thing and do the same thing here and move it back. Like so. So if we were to go back inside my website here and refresh it, you can now see that everything looks like it's supposed to. So let's say I just want to change one thing in here and I want to say I am Danny Crossing instead. Then we can actually save and submit it and actually change it. Now we can't do it right now because we haven't actually set it up so we can change it, but just so we have all the content in here from the database, I think this was a good idea just to do really quickly. So what we want to do is we want to go back inside our profile settings.php page, and we want to create this page that we link to here called profileinfo.inc.php, because this is going to be the include file or the include page that is going to just take care of handling all the data that we submit using the form, and then use the proper classes that we want to use in order to change the database. So what I want to do is I want to go back inside my includes folder in this case here, not my root folder, but my includes folder. I want to right click, create a new file. I'm going to call this one profileinfo.inc.php. And again, just in case people get confused about the .inc part, it's the exact same thing as when it comes to the .classes up here. It's just a naming convention that I use in order to, distinguish if this is a includes file, which is just basically handling data submitted by a form, or if this is a file that has classes inside of it. So just a naming convention that I use. So I can go ahead and create this file. And in here, we're going to go ahead and open up the PHP tags to start with. We're not going to create a closing tag. We talked about that previously in this video here. And what I want to do is I want to create a session_start, because we want to actually have a session in order to grab the session variables, which will come in handy once we need to figure out which user we want to change the information for. So below this, I want to create an if statement that simply goes in and checks if we did actually get to this page properly by actually submitting the proper form. And we did talk about that there was another way we should do it rather than using isSet, which is this way right here, where we actually go in and use a super global called _server and actually check if we did actually get here using a post method. So with this, we can go inside our if statement, and inside the if statement, the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to grab the data that we sent to this page. So right now, for example, we have the about, the title, and we have the text underneath the title that we sent to this page that we want to update inside the database. So what I want to do is I want to say that we have a about variable, which is going to be equal to HTML special characters, or COS at the end here, parentheses, semicolon. And inside of this one, we want to make sure we actually grab the post method, which is going to be the first one, which is about. So we're going to say post, brackets, and about. Then we want to include the rest of what we need to have in here in order to actually use the HTML special character method. And we're going to do the exact same thing when it comes to the other two pieces of data. So we're going to grab this, go down to the next line, paste it in. It's actually going to write intro title. And we want to change the post name that we actually passed over. So in this case, it's intro title. And then we want to change the last one here, which is going to be intro text. And then again, we want to change it inside the post method, intro text. Now we do need to grab two more things, which is going to be the session ID and the session UID. And I just kind of prefer to have them inside a variable in here when we want to use them. So I'm just going to go ahead and say we have a variable. It's going to be called ID, and it's going to be equal to a session super global. So session brackets, and then we just simply insert the name of the user ID that we have inside our session. So we can copy paste this one. And then simply change it to UID and also UID inside the naming here. So with this, we now have all the data that we want to grab from the form and from inside the session. So what I can do is I can actually start using the different methods that I want to use in order to actually change the data inside the database. We did already create everything for this, so we don't actually need to do anything when it comes to the classes. So the first thing I want to do is I actually want to grab our database connection in order to actually do something here. And we can actually copy paste this from inside our profile settings. So I'm going to go to the top here, just grab all the information that I have here, go back inside profileinfo.inc.php and just paste them in here. Now we do need to change a couple of things here because we do need to go back one directory because we're inside an includes folder. And in order to get into the classes folder, we need to go out of the includes folder and then into the class folder. So we do need to say punctuation, punctuation / and do the same thing for the other three. And once we've done that, we want to make sure we actually grab the proper classes. In this case here, we want to grab the profileinfo.classes and also the profileinfo-controller, not the view. Because remember, right now we're actually changing data inside the database. So we need to use the controller class for this, not the view class. That is for showing data inside the website. Now, we do also need to change the name for this new object down here. So it's not profileinfo-view, but profileinfo-controller. And we do also need to pass in some data, because right now, and the reason that we also needed the username for this one is if I were to go inside my controller class, you can actually see that we are requiring both an ID and a username in order to actually create an object based on this class here. So going back inside our profileinfo.inc.php file, what we can do is we can pass in these two pieces of data. So first of all, the ID, and then we want to pass in the UID, which is the username. And with this, we now have a object created off of this. So what we can do is simply refer to the method that we have that can actually go in and update our database. If we were to go back inside the controller class, just to show you, we do actually already have a method that we created called update profile info. So this one is going to take care of actually updating our database whenever we submit new data to it. So what I can do is I'm just going to copy it here. So we have the name for it. Go back inside profileinfo.inc.php, and then I want to take my profile info variable, profile info. Let's actually make sure we do that correctly. So it's not a for, but a variable. And we simply want to refer to the method inside this object here, which is called update profile info. So I'm just going to close it off here with a semicolon. And then we, of course, want to make sure that everything inside the parameters are correct. So we're passing in about, which is this one up here, intro title, which is this one up here, and intro text, which is this one up here. And with this one, this is everything that we need. We just need to send the user back now to the actual profile page with the new changes. So we're just going to go and include a header function, which we have done plenty of times by now. So we just paste it in here. It is a method called header that is simply going to add a location, which has to be spelled this way, by the way. And then we just add in the path that we want to send the user back to. So in this case here, we're going back one directory. So we're going out from the includes file, and then we're going inside our profile.php file. And then we say error is equal to none, just so we can see as the person who's making this site if there is an error or not. So what I can do is I can save this and we can actually test this out. So going inside our website, I can actually go ahead and let's actually just go back to our profile page. So this is how it looks like right now. It says, hi, I'm Crossing, welcome to my profile page, blah, blah, blah. Tell about yourself inside the about. But if I were to go inside profile settings and actually change some of this text, so instead of tell me about yourself, I can say, I am a YouTuber. And I can also say, hi, I am Danny Crossing. And we can also go and say, hey there, just to have something. And if I were to submit this, it's going to take me back to my page with errors equal to none. And then you can see that we changed all the text that we have in here to match with what we wrote. So this is how you can actually change content using a just a basic form, so you can change the content inside your profile page. And this is actually everything that we need for this video. We're actually done now. Hey! Long video and we reached the end. So that's nice. Now you learn how to create a basic profile system so you can actually go in and use the login system for something to actually change the content inside your page. Do remember that this is going to be a, just a template to sort of like show you how a profile page could be set up. There's of course a lot of things that goes into creating PHP with security and additional error handlers that you might want to check for and those sort of things. But this is just kind of like a nice place to teach you how to write PHP and get familiar with it, and how do you actually queue things inside the database, and how do you actually submit new information to the database if you want to change content and that kind of thing. So it's just kind of like a really nice video to teach you the basics of how to write PHP, especially when it comes to object-oriented PHP. So with that said, I hope you enjoyed this video and learned a lot from it, and I'll see you guys in the next one.